Thanks, guys. Yeah, I've been with Dove Tree for 10 years and actually 10 and a half years. And of those 10 years, I've known our speaker, Rick Wardroup, for about 9 of those years. He has been an extremely important part of my life for those 9 years, not only business, but also personal. Uh, has been just a real uh, been someone that I've always looked up to. And so for that, I thank you, Rick, and I thank you for being here and agreeing to do this wonderful presentation for us. For those of you that do not know Rick, he is the defense counsel to the Lubbock County Adult Drug Court team, and then also to the DWI court team here in Lubbock. He's also the curriculum director and staff attorney for Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. And with that, I want to give it over to Rick.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm really grateful to be here with you guys, and as I saw some of the people who were checking in, I'm seeing people from CSCD and this kind of thing. So if I get something wrong, I just want you to know that I've got somebody here to blame it on. I spent a good deal of time talking through this presentation, and it was really useful to me to talk to our second in command here. Lubbock is really fortunate with the probation office we have, and they're really good to train us. So I'm real grateful for that. The other thing is I wanted to set out at the start what my goals are and what I hope that my goals are similar to what y'all have. Many of the people that show up in a therapist's office or in, I see that we've got folks from, the student discipline area. Most of the people that show up there are in the legal system somehow. They may be on the fringe of it. They could be just having a case pending at a given time. But I think it's important for all of us to have an idea how we can best serve that person as we go through their case. And so that's my goal, is to see how we can cooperate. And I hope that there are questions at the end that can guide and direct us through some of your thoughts, because I also know Keith and others and George that are on the presentation are active in the field, and I think that it's useful to have that involvement as well. So you may wonder why this guy on this topic. It's almost cliche, hold my beer and watch this. Well, I was one of those guys growing up, and it was that was a way of life. Seemingly normal. I'm going to call that the normal. I'm not so sure that's true or that I'd claim that for my children, but that was the way we went about it. One of the things that I allowed to kind of cover for much of the silliness that went on in my head is that I was able to do reasonably well in school. I set out in school to be a doctor. That didn't work out. I ended up with a degree in chemistry and no medical school interested. And so naturally I was going to have to go to work or go to some more school. So I chose more school. I enjoyed law school, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me. So when I got out of law school, by the time I got out of law school, I was active in an alcoholic lifestyle, and I developed into an active criminal trial practice. My work primarily over nearly 40 years now has been in criminal defense. The middle 15 or so of it was defending people accused of capital murders, and where the state was seeking a death sentence. My addiction and lifestyle finally got me to a bottom where I was able to find a therapist who could direct me to just a whole different life. And that's the life I live now, and the life I'm so grateful for. So those of you who are therapists, I can promise you that if you've got people that you're seeing regularly now who come in and all they can really tell you about how they feel is, I'm frustrated, you know, if you'll stay with those people, there's really a chance that they'll get there from here. My therapist thought for years that I had one key, and I just hit that key when I came in. And truth be told, I was afraid to look for what was really going on, how I really felt, and how the people around me, how they felt. So where do our clients get caught up? I mean, how are they in the legal field anyway? And many of you probably know that the classification of the kind of offense they're charged with or being investigated for, as well as how far along they are in the process, are the two things that give us the most opportunity to work with them and the most opportunity to shape what happens with their case. Because many times what we're really looking for here is a way to mitigate the sanction or the punishment that is either likely to come or in many cases is sure to come. And so that's what we're looking for as the lawyers. Now, I expect that what you're looking for as healthcare providers is a way to help this person find a way to live a life that is maintainable, a life that avoids interaction with law enforcement and those sorts of things. And I can guarantee you that from 40 years, I know that they all have the idea that they're there to get out of this as easily as possible. The bottom end of where a person comes into the legal system is a misdemeanor case. Now, I've got this up here as a misdemeanor case pending because, you know, once they come to my office, and I may turn around and send them to a therapist's office, something has happened that has turned the scales to where they are probably finally willing to look at something because they think there's going to be a benefit for them having made that choice. Many times that is the case. A misdemeanor case is punishable by up to 1 year in a county jail. One of the things that they don't advertise too much, but I can tell you, is county jails are nasty for a reason. The idea is you don't want to have to spend much time in a county jail, and that's where you go if you go to jail on a misdemeanor. The idea is with prisons, they are that's where you're going to spend a lot of time. And so they changed the format a lot. So the bottom line is these folks are in a misdemeanor. They are looking at jail time. Most of them, if it's a first offense, are looking at a probation of a sentence.
Brett, I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I think that we need to put your presentation up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been going through this and really enjoying it. Shame y'all couldn't see it.
That's fine. Thank you.
Let's see if I can get that done. Well, okay. Now do you have it? No.
Yes, it's on the screen. You just want to hit that presenter view or hit play from the screen that you want.
All right. How about play from there?
There you go.
And then,
Thank you.
well, sure. Y'all should have seen those slides. They were wonderful. You would really enjoy them. Truth be told, now the folks, I mentioned that misdemeanor folks are generally looking at probation if it's a first offense. And the idea behind that, especially you folks at the CSCD have a better idea than me, but the idea behind that is somebody's engaged in behavior that we feel like we can change, and we feel like we can show them a different way if we can find out what it is, why it is they've decided to behave in this fashion. And we could do it through having them report at least monthly and maybe sometimes at the outset more often than that. People who are facing felony cases have the potential of going to a state jail or to prison. These are the cases that there's a lot more at stake for the client and for your patient or your client. And these are the ones that we have the opportunity here in mitigation to show that this behavior was driven maybe by an addiction, and the addiction may have been co-occurring with mental illness, and there may have been things in this person's past, in their childhood, that help explain why they were predisposed to drugs or alcohol or both. All that said, none of that matters if there's not going to be any change in the behavior. And so that's where therapy comes in, and that's where people that can help these folks recognize that there's a different way to live. That's where they could be so useful. Now, in all of these cases, we're really talking about the opportunity to, this is early going here, so we're talking about opportunities to negotiate plea bargains with the district attorney. So when you move through, there are other times that we've got people who have pled guilty and they're waiting sentencing. Now, that can happen 2 or 3 different ways. That you could be having a judge assess punishment, you could have a jury assess punishment, and either way, once again, what you're looking for is evidence that this person is before court on the worst 15 minutes of his life, not the way he lives every day. Also, that he is rehabilitable and he has begun that rehabilitation. So as I mentioned, you have the choice of going to the jury for punishment or to the judge. The single most important thing to a lawyer coming from a therapist is not what you can say good about my client. It's what the credibility that you bring with you. My client may or may not have presented well to you. And the bottom line is, you have got to relate to the jury for this to be of any value to me. So you have got to do, in my estimation, what I consider the much harder work than what the lawyer has to do. You have to get down to the issues that caused behavior that are unacceptable in our society and cause behavior that our district attorney's office is geared up to protect our society from. And so when you can help that way and be able to present, this is what we're working with, these are the changes I can see, and these are the efforts that the client is making, well, that's good evidence for me. That's important for me, it's important for my client. But if you are the next hired gun, if you testify 3 times a week and every one of your clients is getting better and better without really any movement, there's not any credibility there. So we have to look at what our clients' needs are. From a legal point of view, generally those needs are to have some evidence of mitigation in their background. In misdemeanor cases, it's a little bit easier because the kind of offense that you're talking about, the behavior that you're dealing with, is not the worst kind. The felony ones are the more difficult, particularly when you get to folks who have long line of thefts, of burglaries that are supporting drug habits. You have to be able to understand the drug habit beneath that before you can do any real mitigation around the behavior. And these are the cases, the child sex assault cases. These are the ones where there's almost always an explanation, not an excuse, but an explanation of where the behavior comes from. Then the question becomes, how can that be modified, if it can be modified? Now, in a sentencing hearing, the only issue at that point is whether a person goes to jail or prison, whether they're placed on probation, and if so, in any of those circumstances, for what period of time. The sentencing hearing, the state is always represented by the district attorney, who, when you have a victim case, you're generally going to have to face the victim, and you're going to have to make a case that the jury sees that your person is rehabilitable and not likely to commit this kind of act again. A thing about this from the probation point of view is that there are different caseloads that they put the probationers on, generally directed at the kind of offense that they've committed, but also the underlying background of the offense. Probation offices around the state really do a good job of understanding, of screening the people when they come in, and learning about who they are and why they are. And so they can do a really nice job. If you've had a person who has been on probation or reporting probation pre-trial, very often the probation officer will be a witness that the defense is interested to call again. So if we're presenting evidence to a jury on a punishment hearing, you've got 6 in a misdemeanor or 12 in a felony case, and you've had the opportunity to interview these people to see if they'll take a job that they don't really want and serve on your jury. The bottom line about that is they are bringing with them all of their background and their understanding and their interaction in the community. And that's why often we'll want to have the jury assess our punishment, because juries often, prospective jurors, live in a different world than judges do, than lawyers do. And they have a different and a more accepting understanding sometimes of people's frailties. There are sometimes, though, that you just don't want a jury, or that you're afraid of a jury. You may know that judges generally give 5 years to do on this kind of an offense. And while a jury might give me probation, I'd rather take the 5 years. That's a pretty sure deal. So I go to the judge. The hearings before judges are much less formal. There are still rules to be followed, but the bottom line there is you are dealing with one person instead of potentially 12. And so the presentation you're making can be a little more focused and more to a specific point if you've got something like that. There are times that people come back on post-conviction, whether they're, this happens in cases I worked on a lot, in death penalty cases, where the case is being made that at trial the mitigation was not sufficiently developed, but these are the real background issues for this client. Sometimes you see issues like this on parole, that a parole office, your AA meetings are full of people on probation and parole, most of them carrying a piece of paper, getting it signed so that their officer knows that they're attending. Now, some of these people are also engaging, but many of them aren't. They're there because they have to be there. Parole generally is a system that's less involved in the rehabilitation and more involved in keeping up with people, helping them with practical things, ensuring that they're work qualified, these sorts of things. Now we start to look at this from our client's point of view, and of course our clients want to get out of free jail card, get out of jail free card. And they don't realize often that neither the therapist nor the lawyer can be that for them. That's something that is going to have to be developed. There's going to have to be a uh, mitigation presentation made, and also understood and believed, that that makes a jury believe that they're entitled to the second, or in sometimes the third or fourth chance that they're asking for. I'm going to say that in nearly 40 years, almost all of my clients initially claimed that they were innocent when I went to work for them. But as we worked through the process, as my investigation went on, and as we developed some mitigation evidence, a great majority of them ended up pleading guilty. And what that means to me is two things. One is, just as most chemically addicted people, first line of defense is denial. It's the same way with people who are involved in the criminal justice system. You know, most of them are not proud of what they're there in your office for. And so their first chance is to, their first effort is to make themselves seem more like you than like the criminal that's on the street. And that's certainly understandable. But the bottom line is that that takes time. And if they don't engage, then neither the therapist nor the lawyer can do much for them. And so you're thinking, what do we need to work with? And what we need to work with as the lawyer is a stable way of life that they can continue to live. And it's really, really hard to persuade a person accused of a crime that accountability leads to a truer freedom. When we start to try to explain that, you know, you've got to be accountable to this probation officer, or to it starts off, this bondsman, and you've got to report every time that they tell you to. They don't realize that they are building some character traits that many of them weren't taught as children and growing up. And so it becomes useful for them to pick these things up at this level whenever they can. From a therapist's point of view, you know, I can only tell you what I feel like I gained from understanding the goals my therapist had for me. I think the first thing that was important is an acceptance of responsibility. You know, I was able to live in a world of denial, in a world of there's somebody else out there who's worse than me, and that I'm not hurting anybody but myself. You know, I put in this slide the 12 steps: honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And I put that there because that's where I come from. My therapist's greatest gift to me was getting me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was over 25 years ago, and I couldn't be more grateful for it today. But as I mentioned early in the presentation, she spent an awful long time with me not recognizing that I had a problem and not caring to do the things that I needed to do to help with that problem. So I think the second thing that the therapist is looking for is a willingness to seek another way. The third thing they look for, I believe, is another type of willingness, and that's a willingness to be teachable. On the road to teachability, I think we have to learn to be vulnerable, to realize that we're being asked and encouraged to try different behaviors that are going to feel uncomfortable, and we are not going to feel like we've mastered these behaviors for a long time. And then finally, I think the fourth kind of willingness that we could look for in this group is a willingness to accept small victories. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. I didn't get sick in a day, but incrementally, I can get well. And so we take that to the lawyer, and I mentioned a minute ago that the thing the lawyer wants more than anything else is credibility. Because if your credibility or a therapist's credibility rubs off on the lawyer, rubs off on the client, if it's there in fact. And that credibility comes from having evidence, whether it's evidence of hard work in therapy sessions, or hard work through Alcoholics Anonymous or other places as well. So, uh, I don't think there's any expectation that all of it's going to be easy and that, gosh, if they've just got enough money to hire a therapist who will come in and testify, that everything's going to be unicorns and rainbows from now on, because that's just seldom the case. If it's a drug addiction situation or alcoholism, those are chronic, relapsing states of life. And so the people who are in remission for some period of time have got to keep their mind wrapped around the fact that it doesn't have to stay that way. And if we're not careful, and if we don't continue to do the things that our therapists tried to help us learn to do, that we're going to slip right back where we came from. So sometimes you wonder, well, what are the difference in wants and needs? And are there difference between our clients' wants and our clients' needs? Well, our client generally wants to stay out of jail and prison. And the need with that goes along with entering a recovery program. Our client is generally willing to hire an expert to help persuade the fact finder that he or she can be rehabilitated. But is to be willing to and to fully engage in a therapeutic, I don't know who spelled that for me, but they missed it, a therapeutic relationship with the therapist. And that's the other thing they want is they want relief, and they want relief now. But they don't realize very often that changing a coping skill that is formerly seemed effective. The things I learned in the first few years of Alcoholics Anonymous were that my character defects were things I used to call coping skills. And to a greater or lesser degree, I do that today. So that's a long process, and it takes a therapist who is patient and understanding and in for the long haul. That's the only way that ultimately gets done. Money is a big thing around criminal justice. And so there are lots of times that people have the idea, if I hire somebody, they're going to go say whatever it is I want them to say, whether or not I'm doing the things I need to be doing. And I have a right to that expectation. I think that's one of the things that the lawyer needs to help disavow them of, but that it's it's an expectation that they too often have of therapists and also have of the legal system. If I have a therapist that testifies for me, things are going to go swimmingly. Well, that's not necessarily the case for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that somebody's going to be over there representing the state who is going to have other witnesses who are going to either deny or try to rebut almost everything it is that our client has come to show at the punishment stage of the trial, and to some degree try to scare a jury of this person if they think that's the appropriate thing to do. So the bottom line is there's got to be a meeting of the minds between the client, the lawyer, and the therapist of what is being done, what the goal of each step is, and how we are going to get from one place to the next. So that the bottom line about money can't be a primary consideration there. Now, that really brings it around to how people get to probation, for instance. There are two main types of probation. There is what's called straight probation, where a client is convicted of the offense that they were charged with, and they are also sentenced on that offense. But the judge withholds the imposition of that sentence and places it on probation. So long as the person behaves appropriately on the probation, the sentence that's been pronounced against them never goes into effect. During the time of their probation, this person, our client, is convicted of a felony. There are people that think that because they don't go to prison, they've not been convicted, and that's not true. During the term of a probation, they are convicted. That comes up around people wanting to carry guns or to have weapons in their homes and some of those things. So it's really important to break that down. And probation officers do a wonderful job of that. The other type of probation is a deferred adjudication. Deferred adjudication is a situation where a person pleads guilty, and notwithstanding that plea and the evidence to support it, the court does not enter a finding of guilt against the person and places them on probation. And the way that works out is if at the end of the probation period they've not violated, then the case is dismissed and that person has never been convicted of a felony. Now that can be real important for some licensing professions and some things like that. And those are the two types of probation. Now the supervision that goes along with those probations, though, is very similar, and that is that each one of them has the same terms and conditions of probation. Generally, that they report to the probation officer once a month, that they not violate the law, that they not associate with people of disreputable or harmful character, except for their lawyer. If their lawyer is harmful or character, then they can still visit with them. But the bottom line is the supervision is very similar. That supervision can be ratcheted up. It can be taken up to a more intensive supervision. It can be placed on a specific kind of caseload. If it's a DWI repeat offender, then you may find that person headed to one type of place. If it's a DWI first offense, the odds are good that unless it's over a 0.15 blood alcohol, that they're going to get just your normal probation and go on down the road. So these are the things that, this is the type of supervision that's available there. If a person goes to jail, they generally will come out with no more probation, no more supervision. If they go to prison, then they will generally come out with some parole. So we'll talk about parole a little bit later on. These are the areas where the sanction for a parolee, for instance, is that he goes back to prison or she goes back to prison. A probationer, if they violate their probation, part of the disposition, that's going to depend on how they violated it, but they are subject to having that probation revoked and them going and doing whatever amount of time they were sentenced to when they pled guilty. Now, deferred adjudicated people are in a different situation because at that point, if they violate, the whole range of probation, the whole range of punishment is open to the court at that time. So they have a lot more to lose by a violation, just as they have a lot more to win by staying out of trouble. Now, I want to move over from there. That's the regular type of supervision. I want to move over to newer and different recovery models of courts. This slide shows a young man shaking a judge's hand, and it's the kind of thing you really don't expect a guy to say, "Thank you, judge," or "We're on the same team." But I can tell you the drug court program, which was started in Florida by Janet Reno over 25 years ago. I can't say exactly how long ago. And as you may know, Janet Reno ended up being the Attorney General of the United States under Bill Clinton. But the idea was that this is a recovery court. This is a treatment court. And they have them for DWIs, for drugs, for many different types of things. The main difference about a recovery court is that it's based on a team concept. You don't have the prosecutor and the defense at one another's throats saying bad things about the client and this kind of thing. You've got a whole team coming together to work together for the benefit of the participant. We start off, we have a judge, and in fact, our judge of our drug court has been the national chair of the drug court professionals group. And so we in Lubbock have an amazing amount of training, partially because he's partial to that, but partially because he knows the benefits of it. The judge is the face of the team. He is the one that has immunity from a civil suit. If one of the participants wants to sue us about something, but his decision are almost always made after staffing whatever issue it is. And by staffing, I mean discussing both the participant and the behavior and the potential sanctions with the other members of the team and considering the input of each of those members. When you think about the therapist role here, when Lubbock County started our drug courts, we had out-of-house counselors. We now have in-house counselors all the time. And we also have star care at the table. We have the mental health people able to do the screenings for us, and then they come in and we're able to provide the type of counseling that's necessary in-house. You think about the probation office, generally you think about the person who's going to pick you up and take you to jail right before you go to prison. Well, I can tell you that the probation officers in both drug court and DWI court in Lubbock County are far from that. These are people who have been trained about recovery courts, and they have also shown that they have a heart for the team concept and also a heart for recovery. So this picture is of a probation officer, but it's not the type of thing that we see often. Our probation officer is generally reporting to the team because the participant has seen them weekly to start with, and they know better than anybody what's going on. Also at the table is the prosecutor, and I can tell you that Sunshine Stanek, our local prosecutor, is sold on drug court. She is looking into agreeing to expand it to include the veterans drug courts that they have around the state that we've never had. Our drug court here started with the least likely to reoffend people in the world. And those people were on deferred adjudication. They could get expunctions at the end of everything. But all of the training that we went to showed us that where the money is best spent is on people who are high risk, high needs. And that's high risk to recidivate and high needs for treatment. So these are the worst kind of offenders. These are the people that need it the most, and that's where our money is best spent. And so over the years, we have morphed all of our courts to where they take that consideration. Now, the defense counsel's role, as I mentioned a minute ago, is far different in drug court than it is in regular court. You look at the slide and the picture on the left, you're advocating for your client, but I don't represent any one of the clients or any one of the petitioners. I'm a team member. If they have something that is going to be contested, another lawyer is appointed to represent them. Now, there are different kinds of models around the country that handle this differently. This is the way we're most comfortable, and I think it works out really well. Our court coordinators do just what they say. Basically, they are the judge in both of the cases I'm working on with the skirt on. They do the work that prepares everything up, and they do a wonderful job of that. We have law enforcement at the table too, and I think that gives our participants another look at who and what law enforcement is. At graduation time, our drug court people write a letter to their arresting officer. And it's been a fairly common occurrence for the arresting officer to show up at their graduation. And there is nothing like the arresting officer looking at this person and seeing that that's not the man or woman I arrested. And these people that are back here, their family who have come around to support them, are not what I would have expected. And so that's one of the real joys of this kind of handling of supervision, is you see that that the participants see law enforcement's not always on them, and law enforcement sees that their petitioners have a different side as well. Lubbock County has an adult drug court, a DWI court, a freedom court for people who come back from treatment at either CRTC or SafeP, and then the SWIFT court, where people really probably are less likely to be addicted as they are to be, I don't know, they've just got criminal behavior that wants to ooze out. And every once in a while it does, and this court tries to direct that. Now, there are other places that therapists and all may get involved with clients who are involved with the legal system. One of them, of course, is in family law. My guess is Judge Johnson, who hears the temporary hearings in Lubbock County, doesn't go a week without hearing 65 to 95% of his cases having something to do with alcohol or drugs or some sort of aberrant behavior. The other type is a type that I know a little more than I wish I did of, is that there are some times that your clients are going to be involved with the law in licensing. House was a program, a television program on for years, where the good doctor had himself a little bit of a problem with drugs, but he had access, so that wasn't a problem. And then the other one is a little more like me. Their lawyers have a horrible track record with drug abuse, with alcohol abuse. And we're finally finding a way, I think, to modify some of the behaviors and some of the outlooks that we've carried with us for years, most of it from before law school. So the licensing agencies generally are real supportive of people who make a choice to go into recovery. But I'm not going to say skeptical, they want to see it before they believe it. So this is another place that the credibility of a therapist is imperative. So in the end, we look back and between the three positions that we're talking about here, therapist, client, and lawyer, the bottom line for the best result is going to be transparency. My goal needs to be clear to the therapist as well as the client. The client's goals need to be clear to both the therapist and me, and the therapist's goals need to be clear to us as well. And we can't walk on each other. We've got to recognize that this is a coordinated effort that we're making here, and that the best result that we're going to find, and I think this is one of the reasons that drug courts are so effective, is in this coordinated fashion. And so sharing information to the degree that's possible is absolutely imperative to achieve that common goal. And with that, I'll take questions if you have some.
Thank you so much, Rick. That was amazing. A lot of great information on this. So in the chat section, I believe that there was only one true question asking if you would support a veterans court, drug court.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really been strange to me that we've been so slow to get one here, because we have had successful drug courts all down through the line. And the evidence is that that veterans drug courts can do amazing things. I have the good fortune to work with some folks in Collin County on some of the other trainings we do, and they have a veterans drug court that does a tremendous job. So many of the veterans are come back, suffering with PTSD or, brain injury. And either one of those things can lead them to engage in behavior. And sometimes it's alcohol or drug, accelerated, but to engage in behavior that they just wouldn't engage in otherwise. And that if we can help them get over that hump, these are not people our society needs to fear. So I think going back to the prosecutor's job is to protect society to start with, and that's good. I think there's some really good ways to do it that they are developing in veterans courts, and I'm optimistic. I know that there are many of the blocks in place now for us to have one of those in relatively short order.
That would be great. Does anyone have any questions that maybe thought of a question while he was speaking and just didn't put it in the chat section? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask Rick a question.
Somebody added a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It looks like Cole came up with a question here. What are some of the best practices for a therapist, clinician, facility, or admin working with a specialty court participant?
That's a great question, and I think the first one is accountability. I know we've got Oxford House people, and we may have others there. But the bottom line is we've got to. If you tell them to be there at 9 o'clock, they need to be there at 9 o'clock. And if they're not, there should be a sanction of some sort. The other thing is with accountability is stability. It needs to be predictable what behavior is expected and what the consequence of not meeting that behavior is. Many of these people, I think, for all intents and purposes, we are re-raising. I found myself as I went through recovery, when I came into recovery, is that these are things a child knows, and I wasn't using them. And I think we find sometimes that our participants are needing a reminding along that line, and by giving them a stable place where they have expectations, I think it'd be very useful.
Thank you. And thank you, Cole. That was a great question. I apologize for not seeing that. And then Kimberly out of Dallas County is reminding everyone that the National Association of Drug Court Professionals is a great resource. And then I also want to say that we also have here in Texas TASC, which stands for Texas Association of Specialty Courts, which is a great Texas resource as well. And so let's see, does anybody else have any questions? I do know that one thing I wanted to mention, everybody, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but Rick, the courts here, I've seen them invite the police officers that made the initial arrest to the drug court graduation to see the person they arrested actually graduate from drug court. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I talked a little bit about it. It's just an incredible opportunity because two things happen. One is they shake hands often in a way that you wouldn't expect this former criminal behavior to shake the hand of a law enforcement person. And they also seem to accept that they do because they write about it, that the policeman or sheriff's deputy or whoever it was doing their job, and almost uniformly they thank them for doing their job because it turned their life around. It gave them the opportunity to recover.
Yes, it's an amazing thing to watch. And then also, Cole has another great question. What are some tips on collaboration with probation, attorney, police departments, etc.?
You know, the collaboration, I'm not, the law enforcement part in there makes it a little more difficult to answer, because generally, until there's a disposition of the case, there's not much that you're willing to share with law enforcement, and they don't have a whole lot to say except through the prosecutor. But as far as the therapist, that was really part of my hope here, is that we see that we've got to share information, and we've got to let one another know how we're doing. You know, if the therapist has a goal for the client and he or she is not making efforts to it, I can motivate them. Or some other things around there. If there are behaviors that I need him to show to persuade this prosecutor, the therapist may be able to help those things. So I think that that communication and transparency is the ticket there.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
I'll add on that, Rick, for collaboration. Just in Dallas County, I've had the opportunity of working quite a bit with Dallas County and DWI court, especially our misdemeanor courts. Judge Patterson offers the DWI court here in Dallas County, and I've gotten the opportunity to serve on that court. And they're constantly looking for speakers for graduations and people to come in and just offer hope to some of these people in drug court and in DWI court. So, you know, if you are looking to do some collaboration to get with some of these larger courts, I'm not sure how it is in Lubbock, but in Dallas County, certainly they're willing to do some collaboration on that front to get with those judges and those probation officers to offer hope to those clients in the programs. So that helps as well for collaboration.
Great.
Yes, it does. They in the court system here in Lubbock is the same way. I've shared my story with the drug court and the DWI court before. They do a lot of collaboration here in Lubbock, but you know, Rick, would you like to share maybe your email or a contact for you in case anybody thinks of anything they'd like to ask you?
Sure. Will the PowerPoint be made available, or can they? Because I've got it on the first slide. If that's
Oh, great. I can absolutely do that. So I did put my information in there. If anybody, I'm going to put my email address in here so that if anybody would like to have the presentation, they can absolutely email me and I will get it out to everyone.
Yes, and Rick, if you want to show us that first slide, we didn't get to see that. So if you want to
that's
have
right.
that.
I was tricking you then, wasn't I? How's that?
There it is. That way they can write that down if they want to.
Sure, sure. I don't see any misspellings on that slide like I did the other one, so maybe that's all right.
Oh, stop calling that out. Come on.
I think you did a great job. Everybody's been in the chat. Everybody's been talking about what an amazing job you did and how informative it was.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Yes, we appreciate you so much. Well, if no one else has any questions, then we're at 1 o'clock, and so we will go ahead and end it. And we want to say again, thank you so much for everybody being here. Thank you, Rick, for the amazing job that you did, as always.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.